Welcome to our second day of our second annual Creativity Conference, where we explore creative lives outside of the architectural community. I'm David Kennedy, the chair of the Interior Architecture Committee. We want to thank our sponsors. First of all, our participating sponsors this evening, Armstrong Ceilings, Integrated Marketing Solutions, Building Product Reps, and MOSA, and our virtual exhibitors, PLP SoCal Lighting Reps, and Solotube International. At the break in the middle of the program, be sure to visit the sponsors' product exhibit breakout rooms. And we'd also like to recognize the AIA LA annual sponsors. At the end of the evening, we'll announce a raffle winner for Understanding, the massive book on information architecture by Richard Saul Wurman, architect and founder of TED. While we have everyone's attention, we'd like to encourage any teams with outstanding interior architecture projects to submit for this year's AIA LA Design Awards. The registration deadline is June 11th, and actual submissions are due by August 2nd. Tonight, we are fortunate to have our evening moderated by the architect, interior designer, educator, Annie Wu, principal at Chu and Gooding Architects. Annie is new to our conference this year, but has already contributed some interesting discussion points in our preliminary meetings. We're looking forward to her moderation and insights. So with that, we'll hand it over to Annie.
Hi, thank you very much for having me as part of the introduction, this prologue of this creativity conference. I'm really honored to be able to very soon introduce you to two fantastic artists who I have great respect for. I wanted to, in the very beginning, maybe just talk a little bit about creativity. I think that it's kind of interesting that we, as architects, often just kind of look into our own discipline and we don't really look too much into other disciplines, but certainly our guests tonight are not of that same ilk. They are very much, I would call them promiscuous harvesters, which are the very best kinds. And they're not afraid to kind of go forward in the way that they mix everything up, and then you will see. So I watched this documentary in preparation for this prologue, and there's a Netflix documentary by a neuroscientist called David Eagleman, and it's called The Creative Brain, and hope not too many people have seen it because I'm basically sharing some of the insights that I saw from the film. And what's interesting is that our brain only weighs 3 pounds, but it takes 20% of our energy to do it. So I guess our brain, if we use it, burns quite a bit of calories too. So just for all of us who are dieting, that's a good thing. Just keep thinking, you would lose some weight doing that. But what makes us uniquely creative and human is that we have the prefrontal cortex, which actually is the only thing in the entire sort of animal kingdom and stuff that allows you to think about things that wasn't there, that won't. So we're able to imagine the future because of that part of our brain for the evolution. So my takeaway from having seen that documentary is that creativity takes ideas from one place and applies them to another place, maybe in an utterly different context. And that's really important because as we move forward, we're going to start seeing that pattern, these things, these kind of little gems of quotes, information from that documentary actually showing up in both Mary Trunk and Sheila Klein's approaches and work. You take in new information and you combine it with things you already know. And that seems to be a really important thing, that you have already a lifetime of experience, but you're still absorbing. And that's why I thought that the promiscuous harvesters of Mary Trunk and Sheila Klein is really important, because they're constantly absorbing new information and mixing it with their information that they have. And today they're going to actually also gift us by giving us some more information to put into our brain for nurturing our creativity. Creativity is also refashioning what already exists. So a lot of people think that creativity is like an innovation. Nothing has ever happened before, but everything has been there. It's just a way that you begin to refashion it, that it becomes new. Some of the mechanisms I found when I was reading and looking at this documentary is that what you have to do with the information that you gather, whether they're old or new, you got to bend it and break it and blend it. So the 3 B's. So I tried to make a really preliminary diagram, and I didn't make it very pretty or anything, but I'm trying to imagine what they really meant. So I imagine, you know, some of you guys who would know that libraries used to have little drawers of card catalogs, and you're supposed to go there and go find a book by pulling out a drawer and looking for the cards. So I thought that our brain is that kind of thing. It's like this round library with a lot of drawers in it. And during our lives, we file things away, you know. So I'm just throwing a few things in there. You can read it. And we just keep filing and filing things away. And, you know, the question is, then what do you do with it? When do you use it? How do you creatively combine things? So one of the things you start to see in the middle of this round room of our brain is that you got to start throwing things together. So the way that, if I interpret it correctly, what was being said before is you file more cards. You come to as many input as possible. And tonight we're going to get some more input from Mary and Sheila. You take random cards out, like this person is doing in the center, and you throw it all together, regardless of their categories. And you hypothesize a relationship between those cards. So you might have a card from literature, and then you have a card from cooking, right? And then you got to figure out what to do with it. So you got to bend it and break it and blend it to come up with some new idea. And then you put them in an utterly different context than the original. So if you have literature and you have cooking, maybe, you know, it's about being on a boat. I don't know, you know, something like that, that begins to make your brain think outside of the normal way. The final takeaway, I thought, was they talked about 3 ways of engaging the creativity process. And again, no matter where I go with the documentary, I keep seeing Mary and Sheila in this too. So the 3 ways are, you got to try something new, because our brain is very default to try to do the same thing over and over again. And we have to just like resist doing that, and pushing boundaries and not fearing failure. So how do you try something new is a lot of times is digging deeper. So if you are at the front door and you're going to ready to walk in, you can spend 5 minutes at the door thinking about how you walk through that door and observing all the different aspects of that door. And you probably come out designing a better door or threshold by the end of it, by sort of contemplating everything you can. So a lot of times I think that digging deep also comes along with slowing down. And nowadays, when information comes to us so quickly, everything is eyewash. But in fact, I think the creative thing to do is to kind of really stare at something for a long time and try to make connections with that round library of card catalogs in your brain and try to see what sticks, right? And then the other thing is pushing boundaries and finding the limit of what still works. Now, what still works is kind of important. Like you can do outside of the boundary, you can do something super weird and no one gets it, but you can do something where it's so weird to the point of being uncomfortable, but you just stop there. And then that becomes like completely a mind stretcher for a lot of people. And so that's another one of the three ways to engage a creativity process. And finally is the one that we always tell our students, it's like, take risks, just do it, nothing's going to happen to it, just have faith, it's going to come out at the end. And that's when I tell the story of the famous, I think it's the Kipling story of the blind man who were trying to describe the elephant. And a lot of you guys know that. One person goes up there and says, oh, the elephant's like a wall. The other one said, oh, the elephant's like a big boa constrictor. Another one said, oh, the elephant's like a trunk. And then another one said, well, the elephant is like a rope. At the end of the process of a creative process, to quote something that Mary had said, is like, you're going into the fog banks and you should not know what it is that you're going to. And then in the end, it might be an elephant. And if it's not an elephant, it's okay. You just try it again, but that you would have faith that you will come up with something. If you just put the work into it, it will put you in a path. So no, I don't think, see if this works. So I want to try to see if this.
I think originality is bunk. I think it's nonsense. There never has been such a thing as true originality.
Creativity doesn't mean inventing something out of nothing. Instead, it's about refashioning what already exists.
The ideas that you have, the concepts that you have, are tools that will empower you to do more than you could without them. Before the Empire State Building was built, someone imagined it, then they built it, and now it's part of the real world.
If someone's like, that's weird, I'm like, yes. Because it means they don't know it, if they're unfamiliar with it. And that's always kind of what I'm trying to do.
I think science is inherently creative. I think you have to be to discover something new that other people have not discovered already.
Regardless of what you do for a living, creativity and the creative part of your being is essential to your happiness.
All of my experiences off the piano have something to do with what I'm doing on the piano.
After the Gulf War, I went to school trying to find something I could do for the rest of my life, and it just kind of happened with ceramics.
It's always easier to be a critic than a creator.
This is our chandelier.
I find myself when I write, I create a whole other world, the world that I'm supposed to be living in.
Because of this experience in my life, I was able to be reborn inside. And I am somebody that I never knew I could
be. It's not like you kind of sit around and soul kind of cushion and ideas kind of come down. That doesn't actually happen.
To be creative, to think outside the proverbial box, you have to be willing to be wrong.
What do you have to do to be able to join in?
You have to try your best.
You have to try your best and you have to take risks.
Sometimes it hurts like hell and it's embarrassing. And if you look at Maddie, it's hard, man. It's not a comfortable position all the time.
And of course, that is what creativity is, that we actually have the power to imagine the world that isn't our world yet.
So I want to first of all say my thank you before, which is thank you, Mary and Sheila, for feeding our brains tonight. And at this time, I think I'm introducing Mary, right? Yeah. Okay. So I found it very interesting when I first talked to Mary that she was teaching at Art Center. I've taught at Art Center before, so we have a little bit of that type of connection, but that she has been practicing art in so many different ways and reconnecting different things. So one of the things that I thought was very interesting about her was that she started in painting, and then she became a choreographer, and then she became a filmmaker. So not just the fact that I have so much respect for someone who take the risk, who just jump and do something that is entirely outside of their field. And that's one of the kind of hallmarks of creativity, is someone who would do things like that. But the fact that she takes on like the most, I think for me, the most difficult subjects, right? So she would do something about mother. I mean, who can approach that subject, you know? And the ordinary things in her hands become beautiful, become strange, and she helped us see things in a very different way. So I think I'm going to let her introduce the rest of who she is to you, but I want to say thank you, Mary, and the screen is yours.
Thank you so much, Annie. I really appreciate that introduction. That was so great. And I'm looking forward to seeing the movie. So I'm going to just start with my screen share and start my presentation in a second. Let's just make this a little. So can everyone see that? Great. Well, thank you to everyone that's part of AIA. I'm so honored to be here. And thank you for organizing all of this. As you heard, my name is Mary Trunk, and I guess I'm a multimedia artist. I did start as a painter, and I became a dancer and a choreographer, then a filmmaker, and also a visual artist still. This presentation is about my process, my inspirations, my work, and my house. And I'm calling it window frames because hopefully that will make more sense at the end of this presentation. This slide is what I see out of my office window and what I was looking at when I put all this together. Whoops. So my house, this is my house, and it's not exactly a big house. It's not a tiny house. I like to say it's the right size for me to keep clean for the most part. It's also a house that has influenced my artistic life in ways I didn't quite realize until recently. There's a giant yard, many windows. I really love this house, and I think people who lived here did too. This is the backyard from the other side, and I think it's pretty big. I was scared when I first saw it. Back in 2002, my husband and I decided it was time to move to Los Angeles from San Francisco. He's a cinematographer, and he was just working more and more in Los Angeles, and commuting just seemed unsustainable. We had a 1-year-old daughter at the time. So we visited LA and we looked around and we saw an ad for this house, and we had no appointment. We called the number on the for sale sign. The real estate agent showed up in 5 minutes and let us in. The house felt right to me. It was strange how comfortable it seemed as soon as I walked in. It was 90 degrees out, so maybe it was just the respite from that, but the windows from floor to ceiling we just loved so much, and it framed the world in a way that really excited me. There were open rooms, so much light, one story, simple. I started to fantasize about living here. The house spoke to us. We didn't look at any other houses. We went back to San Francisco with only this house in our minds. And when we saw it, as I said, the afternoon we saw it was very hot. The house only had one air conditioner unit that was blowing at full blast. The bathrooms were outdated. This one still is. There was a back room that was once divided into two and now was super long and narrow. There were 2 doors, and still are, that go to that room, and they're next to each other. So they kind of don't make sense. There's another 2 doors that basically open up to the same space. But when we were looking at the house, we could see possibility, room for improvement. We felt like we could accept flaws because it seemed like risks were taken here, and that this was a place that would evolve. The windows, the light, the shadows, how each room was a different experience, how the windows offered new perspective, the openness, the basic design, the ease of walking through the house. It really felt like we belonged. I felt like the house invited us and we accepted. People lived here, they created here. The house really had a dynamic and sort of committed presence. It's a straightforward, direct, streamlined house, and at first things feel symmetrical, but not everything is perfectly square. The house feels that if it is part of the environment it sits in. The shadows and shapes on the walls, they create frames and reflections of nature, a kind of camouflage. The house really caught our imagination. Only a few weeks after we moved in, we met a neighbor walking down the street. Her name was Kathy. She told us we lived in the best house in Altadena. She raised her 3 daughters in the house, and the only reason they moved was because her husband, an architect, wanted to renovate more houses. She also told us that when they bought our house, someone had transformed the entire space into a Mediterranean Spanish-style home. She and her husband were so appalled, they sold all their wedding china to bring most of it back to its original state. This ceiling treatment here in this picture cost them a fortune. Unfortunately, the renovation did not include the kitchen. They just couldn't swing it. So we live with this out-of-place cabinet hardware, this outdated sink, counters, and tiles. But I sometimes think, are these flaws, mistakes, or is the house revealing its history, its story, its vulnerability? Kathy said she loved this house so much that later in their lives, they moved down the street just to be back in the neighborhood and near the house. And I thought, what is it about spaces that can have that kind of impact? And who made our house? Well, Frederick Frankel built it in 1948, and this is not a picture of him. I could not find any pictures of him online. This is actually Edvard Munch. I just imagined Frederick Frankel would look like this. And when I looked him up, all I could find was this. This contemporary style home was built by architect Frederick Frankel as his own. Its design is based on the Bauhaus movement that started in Germany in 1919 and influenced architecture, furniture, textile, sculpture, graphics, and painting. And that's it. That's all I could find out. Our real estate agent says Frederick Frankel was a Holocaust survivor. She points out that he designed this front wall to protect the house from floods back before there were any houses above ours. I think that might be something that real estate agents say because I still can't find any information about that. The house is made of steel and redwood. It's survived earthquakes and fires. We even have the blueprints, but nowhere have we been able to find out who Frederick Frankel is. So the house also holds a mystery. It offers questions. What was the architect's intent? What if we live here? What will we create? What will it reveal through its windows? What will I see? How will it support my need to be creative? How will our stories become part of the house's history? What will we discover about ourselves in our creative process? Maybe it's the not knowing that makes it a compelling journey. Sometimes you just have to go for it. Trust your instincts, buy the first house that speaks to you, and follow the mystery. And watch how the light changes, how the view shifts, how that inspires ideas and new pursuits. I love that I feel both inside and outside at the same time. The windows are everywhere. Reflections become part of reality. It's not easy to tell the difference between what's inside or outside. It's a state of discovery and confusion, where we all start as artists. Yes, we do have bears that visit regularly. This is Mama Bear and her cubs, who were napping in our yard for a couple of hours one day, and then they climbed over the fence and went next door to swim in our neighbor's pool. One morning I woke up to see Mama Bear on the roof of our garage, and I thought, what is she looking at? I feel like living here it feels like I'm watching my very own movie. Peacocks arrived one morning while I was showering, and they screeched and showed off. I like that my windows let me greet them without frightening them. A hawk flew into the window. I think it may have been going after our cat, but it did get stunned, but soon stood up. It looked into the window of our house for a really long time. I crouch down and watch. The hawk stares back and waits. Many minutes go by and suddenly it flew away. I love that my windows capture this intimate world of its surroundings. So much goes on. What happens around here is unpredictable. I have to expand my thinking. I'm learning to accept the unpredictable as part of my creative process. I'm using my windows as a guide. How do I frame my world? The windows shield and also expose. I can see, but I can also be seen. I feel vulnerable. I can't hide. When friends visit or an unwanted solicitor appears, I know it long before they knock on the door, and they see me from the street. I'm not invisible in this house. The house has withstood fierce Santa Ana winds. I never know when a bear might appear on my roof. There's strength, vulnerability, and the unknown within the walls and property. The windows offer me protection, and they also open me up to others. I can't be invisible. And to make art is to be vulnerable. A house with this many windows is both dangerous and engaging. It protects and reveals. My house provides me with many frames and often frames within frames. I can choose where to look and the windows show me. The choices are endless. There's calm scenes of the sun through the trees, a bobcat naps under a bush, crows eating something dead, neighbors running, coyotes howling, and things I can't quite make out in the dark. We've lived here and worked here longer than anywhere else. The space informs the way we think. The windows frame the world and show me nuance, destruction, life, movement, mystery, and beauty. It's been almost 20 years. I'm comfortable and sometimes fearful at the same time living here. I feel more alert to sounds, light, shadows, shapes, and possibilities. I make stuff here. The windows of the house give me the freedom and inspiration to find my own frames, my own views. When we moved here, our daughter Nuala was 1. I finished my first feature documentary. I made 3 others. I did several short documentaries. I restarted my teaching career. There were lots of challenges. Kids are hard, no matter how cute they are. Making friends, driving the freeways, the heat, it was difficult. But here I feel inspired, vulnerable, and motivated. The house, especially the windows, continually show me the opposing elements that make me both living and creating invigorating and frightening. By revealing the world in its own way, I care about what I see out its windows. I care to know what is happening out there. I want to find ways to share that. Please let me know if you can't see this video. It's going to start in a minute. We feel things when we care. When we care, we ask questions. In a story, we want to know what will happen next. You may find yourself caring about a character, curious about why there are so many windows in a building or why there are none. You wonder, what is this world you are entering into when watching a film? How will it end? What tools did the painter use to make those jagged, piercing blue marks? This is a form of caring, whether you care to know what's going to happen, care about characters you relate to, care to know the process, or care to just stick around and see what happens. This is what I think we take away with most when we experience art, how we feel. We care enough to ask why, how come, what if. For me, creativity allows me to accept the fact that communication can be difficult. But what we take away most are feelings, and that connects us to each other. And why do we connect? Because we can relate to one another's vulnerability. We can't be invisible to each other. The house I live in reminds me of that. The windows reveal and reflect. I don't often have a clear intention of what I will end up with in my work. The process is mysterious, confusing, beautiful, and even infuriating. When I choreograph, I come up with ideas for movement and bring that to the dancers as a creative problem-solving experience. What if I ask them to change the movement phrase and do it twice as fast? What if I tell them to go outside and dance? What if I present them with a series of photos from the sports section of the newspaper and tell them to interpret them as their own movement sequence? What do I see? What are the possibilities? How can I make something out of that material? And if I don't yet see something forming, what are my options? How can I get viewers to care? As a documentary filmmaker, I always ask questions. I interview a lot of people. An interview is about listening and digging deep with genuine curiosity. It's allowing a person to reveal themselves. It's being vulnerable enough to give another person the opportunity and permission to do the same. It's also about seeing others and accepting all the contradictions they are showing me, feeling compassion for them, even if I disagree with their views. I often film everything myself. Listening and anticipating is crucial. Where do I direct the camera? What should be included in the frame and what shouldn't? These are decisions that happen in the moment. It's a heightened way of working, which I find stimulating and engaging. When I'm editing video, I make the decision to start somewhere. I place a clip on the timeline, a movement, a scene that I immediately resonate with. I put another one next to it. What happens? What is it telling me? How has the meaning changed? It's a similar process with drawing and painting. You place your first mark on the surface and you react. You put another down and it's asking you a different question. I like to react. I set up structures, gather material, and start with a general question. There have been many instances when I've hit a dead end. I've had to start over, backtrack, but if I keep my curiosity going, something comes of it. Not always something I share with the world, but even those outcomes lead me somewhere, even if they don't feel like that in the moment. I'm a gatherer. I don't usually go to the grocery store with a recipe in mind. I don't look around to see what looks good and what I'm attracted to. I look around to see what looks good and what I'm attracted to at that moment. I choose those things, then go home and see what I can make from it all. I like randomness, repetition, and surprises. I want to reveal the vulnerable human connections I feel and encounter. I want to take risks while also questioning my choices and convictions, and keep making work no matter the obstacles. My house, the windows, and the surrounding spaces still inspire me and keep me on my toes. The windows in my house frame my immediate world, and my work, my camera frames my expression of my world. Now I'd like to show another video. This is, I'm gonna go backward and start with most recent work and then go backward in time. And this video is a series of 3 dance video excerpts. And dance video is really screen dance for the camera, a hybrid and synthesis between the various techniques of film, video, and the practice of choreography. Some of the footage was created during the pandemic when my daughter was home. The other young woman in one of the excerpts is my niece, Olivia. And I've included a small section from my new hybrid documentary, Muscle Memory, which isn't out yet. But I say hybrid because it includes dance video as part of the documentary. And all of the pieces take place in my house. And I just want to let you know, my good friend David Scholl created all the music. All right, so this next video, and I hope the videos are looking okay. I'm sorry Zoom isn't ideal for this, but maybe you'll get the gist. This is a behind the scenes video of the making of a dance video that's part of the Muscle Memory Project. And just to give you a little background about the Muscle Memory Project, it's a personal memoir about my previous life as a choreographer and dancer, although now I'm doing it again, and the experience of creating and performing dances again in middle age. A lot of these people that you see in this are, I went to college with or were in my dance company in San Francisco. But it really explores my work with framing and composition and my process of making this video. This sequence, what is it? It's a walking pattern. Choose whatever one you want. You can look through them if you want. Just walk the pattern. And you know, the front is anywhere. You don't, front doesn't, no, you're just walking it for now. Yeah, just walk it for now. And memorize it if you can, so you can repeat it.
I'm doing these and then I'm incorporating these.
If you want
if
to.
I want to.
Yes.
Okay.
Choreography right now is creating choreography with the camera. Whereas when I was choreographing before, it was really about the theater and the stage and not capturing images in and out of a frame. I create this vocabulary. I give them the outlines, they interpret it, and then I have not only the choreography to work with, I have the space, I have the timing, and then I have the camera and the frame and the speed and the light, and that just adds all these other elements that make it much more dynamic and complex and exciting. I mean, the fact that they can go in and out of the frame that alone sometimes excites me to no end. There are some people who are aware of the camera and know how to dance with the camera, and that is an incredible joy. It's an incredible experience. There's a relationship between the dancer and the movement I've given them and filming them. It becomes a collaboration together. We're working together to create these images. This next piece is a short excerpt of a documentary I co-directed with my husband, Paul Sanchez, and it's about the composer Gunther Schuller. In his later years, he rarely left his house, a house he loved very, very much, and he managed to do a prolific amount of work here.
I do not write at the piano. I hear the music. Every note I have written, I have heard. I believe that is really the most perfect way to compose. Some of the stuff I write, I can't even play. I would need 35 fingers. I feel that I have done some very important work, but if I try to think about, let's say, comparing my composing to, let's say, Beethoven, which many people on the face of it would consider totally ridiculous. You ain't no Beethoven, come on, forget it. What is it about being the first or the best? I hate all that. Against many other musicians of the last 50 years, what I have done is much less known. I'm not really terribly upset. Some people have no idea what I've done. That's just the way it is. I'm philosophical about that. But on the other hand, I say, my God, I hope that after I die, I might still, you know, be a little bit more appreciated. A lot of people actually hate me because of the outspokenness of my life and because of writing all this terrible atonal music. If you're an American in the 40s and are halfway alive, you have to be aware of jazz. One night, I'm doing my homework. There was Duke Ellington's orchestra. At that point in that broadcast, I heard some sounds I'd never heard before, and it included two low clarinet sounds. And that was important to me because the first composer to use two bass clarinets was the Rite of Spring, Stravinsky. And it's one of the most incredible, eerie, ancient sounds that any composer ever conceived. I said, wow, what? I mean, Ellington knows about two bass clarinets. It went into me very deep, and I lay for hours without going to sleep. Next morning, I said, Pop, I heard some amazing music last night. Boy, I never heard any sounds like that. And I got to tell you, that music is as great as any classical music. And he nearly had a heart attack when I became a rather famous jazz musician and was making money playing with Miles Davis and with the Modern Jazz Quartet. And he saw that I had not turned away from classical music to go to jazz, that I was doing both. Then, he finally came around.
This is a trailer for a documentary I did in Fargo, North Dakota. I filmed over 2 years. It's a collaboration between a painter and 6 architects, which I thought you might find interesting. It was quite the collaboration.
Joel, can we come in? Yeah. I think it does sound outlandish when you first hear about it. Why do this?
Kind of a competition with myself. How free can I think? How far can I stretch?
If I was a straight businessman, I'd say, no way, I can't touch this.
She wants us architects to behave more like artists.
I think abstract art is a complete puzzle for most people.
A lot of the public just does not understand.
I don't want to burden the museum with big moving costs. So these pieces have to break down or be on wheels.
We don't normally do moving things. We like our things to stay still once we put them there.
I think we've lost Jeff.
We're a little behind the gun now.
We've not done very much.
Architects are notorious procrastinators.
We like to blame the contractors and the suppliers.
He told me there was nothing done. There wasn't even a structure.
I made no money. In fact, I lost $30,000.
She presented me this $10,000 bill, and it had all her staff members' hours in it. The message she's giving me is it only stands on its own if you pay.
This isn't about a logical, thought-out return on investment type project. It's a creative risk.
What Margie is working to create in her art is to reflect the spiritual experience.
I find the colors joyous.
There is a need for artists who make work for sacred places or who make sacred places. We don't have enough of it in the contemporary art world.
And if I could do them all that way, use metaphor as a design element, this practice that we call architecture would really be a lot of fun.
It's a fabulous project, and it's something you don't expect to find in the middle of the prairie.
I think it's the most authentic thing that's been done in years in the art and spiritual community.
Spending some time with art can change a person's life, and I have a tremendous faith that art makes a difference.
I have a few more slides, but this is the last video I'm going to show you. It's another trailer for my documentary Lost in Living, which I spent 7 years filming. I was a mother, I am a mother and an artist, and I was wondering, how do people reconcile those two identities? So I spent 7 years hanging out with 4 amazing women, asking myself that question and learning a lot. So this is the trailer for that.
And
An artist's life is a toss-up. It's a crapshoot.
I don't even know how you ever really justify making art.
The biggest trauma of all this is that I am now in pre-production for this movie that is starting in 2.5 weeks, and I have no daycare.
Whenever we went to writing parties, the women would clump together and talk about their babies, and I had a baby too. But I was also trying to take my place with the writers.
I really, really want time. I still don't know how to make art without having time.
I knew that if she was painting, you didn't want to go, oh, hi.
She really didn't want to be interrupted.
I was happy to have them be a bit afraid of me.
3 children, 6 braids, laundry, meals for 5 people 3 times a day.
I have never been so busy in all my life.
I remember depression. I remember tremendous, crushing loneliness.
We're not all together having a common experience with motherhood.
Is the worst part that you're judging me and you can't believe what a shitty parent I am? Or is the worst part that you think I'm judging you and I can't believe what a shitty parent you are?
I think that I've worked in obscurity so long that my work is propelled from inside me, not from the reception of others. You know, if you're making paintings that look like everybody else's paintings, what's the point?
Do I really want to invite a bunch of people that I know nothing about to pass judgment on me? And yet another part of me is like, yes, 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 I do. Has now become completely useless. We're not sure why we bought it, except it's good for putting laundry in.
And I'd like to share just a collage of some of my visual art pieces. This is where I started, and I usually work in pastel, pencil, and marker, but these start out as photographs and then are digitally manipulated with a couple of apps that I really like. And you can find all this work on my Instagram page at Mary Trunk. And as you can see, the window theme and the grid theme are still quite apparent. To come full circle, all of this happened while living in this house. The house has informed my work, my thinking, my imagination, my curiosity, and it continues to do so. And obviously, our cat loves the windows too. We could say we just fell in love with the house, and we did, but now we now have more complex emotions. I still hate the Spanish tile and hardware in the cabinets. The yard sometimes overwhelms me and feels scary. We've had to make many improvements that one doesn't see. It's too many windows to keep clean all the time. The steel and wood creak as if the house is haunted, but I can see the world out of these windows. I feel welcomed when I open the front door and I see the large open space of the living room. And while I don't enjoy washing dishes, I'm grateful I can look out a window while doing it. The house really feels like a part of me, and it reflects what the journey of art making is for me. Complex, scary, comforting, daunting, full of flaws, but beautiful. And on that note, I will stop sharing, and I will be happy to answer any of your questions. Annie, you're muted.
Yeah.
Okay. So I put up a little QR code for those of you who are interested. You just put your phone to your monitor and you can get either the website on the left-hand side of the Ma and Pa Films website, or on the right-hand side, a very interesting, poignant interview that Mary had made for Shout Out LA. I thought it would be good if you wanted to have that resource. So everyone, if you want to have any questions, please post it on chat and we will try to get the questions directed to Mary, but maybe I'll just kick it off. Mary, I thought it was really interesting. Maybe it's the audience of architects that you're considering, or maybe you finally have an audience to talk about the house that, I was thinking about the comment you made, which was, how will our story become the house's history? And the notion of vulnerability that you talked about, that somehow the house also is vulnerable in many ways, that a work of art, let's say the houses, is somehow cannot be very complete. Like it cannot be completely made. It cannot be answering all the questions that you may have, that it has to be kind of generous in terms of being able to be reinterpreted in some way and being wrong in some way. And how do you think about your work relative to this issue of vulnerability? Like, when is the work complete? Or how far do you go to crafting the work before you say stop?
Wow, that's a really good question. I think it's difficult for me to stop, and I'll give you an example. When I was filming Lost in Living for 7 years, I didn't know when to stop. I mean, I started that, and I never thought that I would be doing 7 years of filming for women. 2 of them I followed I started following them when they were pregnant, and I was just completely engaged the entire time. So I think sometimes it goes that way, and other times it's really about figuring out how to get someone to be as vulnerable as they can be, because I do think that's what we connect to mostly. So another example would be with Gunther Schuller. I knew that when I first talked to him on the phone, he reeled off all of his accomplishments, MacArthur Genius Award, Guggenheim, and I said, I don't care about that. We can Google that. I just want to know your process. And I remember when I was at the house, my husband and I decided we wouldn't film him outside of the house. The house is really like a part of him. And I remember asking him a question. I said, where do you compose? I want to film you where you compose. And he sat at a card table and he had a little TV, which he didn't have on for us, that he would watch sports while he composed. He looked at me and he said, usually people ask me to sit at the piano, but you just said to do what I want to do and what I normally do. So we had a structure already. We kind of saw it as we went in. So we had 2 days to film all that. So it's figuring out how to get those moments within the time you have and the information that you have available to you. And I read his autobiography, which was about this thick on the plane. And I just knew that I wasn't interested I wanted to know his process. So that was where I started. Can I answer your question?
Yeah, I think that just to make a comment about Gunther Schuller, he was talking about hearing Ellington, right? Well, he's a classical musician. And in the documentary that I was talking about earlier, a jazz musician who says, jazz does not create itself. It emerged out of a world when classical is known, gospel is known, blues is known, and that somehow jazz is that kind of, born out of all those parents in some way. And I think that what Gunther was talking about, hearing those Ellington to the bass clarinet notes at that time and recognizing that, was also a confirmation of what was being said about how creativity actually comes from these kind of, a swamp of things that happen around you, right?
Yeah, which you brought up in the beginning, which I thought was great. Yeah, exactly.
But just to finish up on the house part, I noticed that in the film on Muscle Memory, or maybe not Muscle Memory, the one before, where you and 2 other dancers were at your house in front of the window with a frame.
Yes.
And sort of making space at the same time, sort of informing the space that was already made by the architecture, like the one where I think it's one of your old friends who appeared also in Muscle Memory, was outside under the eave, at the inside corner of the eave, and she was making the space, but clearly under the eave, there was a space that the architect has made. And that push and pull between the space that was made and the space that she made was so beautiful. And I thought, why wouldn't anyone want dancers to be in every single piece of architecture to kind of like converse, you know, to have that kind of conversation? And how much do we learn about the way that people interpret the spaces? You know, we have architects audience here that are, you know, we made the space, but we don't know how the audience of that space really respond, right? So that was very informative. We have questions from the audience from Lizzie. Lizzie, do you want to come on and just say your question? You can unmute yourself if you want. If not, I can read your question.
I think maybe that's what, yeah.
Oh, I'll read, okay. So Lizzie said, you seem to go effortlessly and beautifully from one idea project to another, and I love all that I saw, but what slips you up? Have you experienced creative blocks, and how do you handle those?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, it's yes. There have been a few times I've gone down a road and it just hasn't sustained my interest. But I'll give you, I think there's a caveat to that. I try not to see those as wasted time. I think I have a little bit of enough experience to know when to quit when something is not sustaining my interest, but I try and think, okay, if this isn't going anywhere, what can I learn from it? What can I take to the next project? Often it's about stop, it's time to go on to the next project. And sometimes that what you've learned can go in there. So that would be the answer to that question. Yeah.
Great. Michael Lukasik, do you want to ask your question about the environment?
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone, and thank you, Mary. That was really interesting. But I guess I'm curious, because you live in your home and it's a place, but it actually kind of also seems like a character in some of your projects, if you will. But in terms of like the environment, how does that affect how you proceed or direct or create? I mean, you live in your house, so you know how to kind of manipulate it and direct it along with the dancers. But then I noticed in one of the scenes that you had filmed, the pavement looked wet. I mean, the sky is gray. Are you waiting for specific times to shoot, or how do you kind of take into consideration or account what's happening around your house that you don't control?
I use my camera a lot. I frame things, I compose things. I go around, I sometimes even go around with my phone and see what I'm framing. And this house has, it's not to sound too, I don't know what it sounds like, sentimental or something, but it really has inspired me. It changes all the time. And I even things like, it's noon, terrible light, you want to shoot in the evening, it still looks beautiful. But I really do tend to look at things through a frame. I compose things, and I will, even before I did some of this dance video stuff in the house, I went around and took a lot of pictures, and I noticed things I didn't notice before, that because I was thinking about making a piece here. So that definitely speaks to me. And I think, oh, I didn't notice how those reflections work, and that I could have someone sitting outside and someone inside the living room, and it would look like they're in the same room. So it's really a matter of exploring the house. It's really an exploration before I start, and while I'm doing it too. So yeah.
There was a comment also from Steph who says, just love your story, and could it be that a house chose you and your family?
Well, it does seem that way, because we did, it was so strange when we saw the house. I mean, we were in the house maybe 15 minutes, and then we went to San Francisco and thought, we can't afford that house. And the real estate agent called us and said, do you want to make an offer? And we had to sell our house in San Francisco in 2 weeks. We did.
So I wanted to play a game. I tend to like to play games with the people I'm moderating. So take it like it's not meant to be a challenge, but maybe a little bit of an insight into how Mary Trunk's brain works in front of us very spontaneously. So you had recommended to visitors of Los Angeles, the Museum of Jurassic Technology as one of the places that you should go to. And I don't know how many of our audience have been there. And, you know, for that, I already like count you as one of my friends, someone who appreciate that place. But also, you also said the hikes in the mountains behind your house in Altadena. Those were two of the places that you talked about. So I was thinking, let's do an exercise and try to make a connection between the two, however you would want to do it. Like you could imagine that you're there filming something at the Museum of Jurassic Technology, you're using your camera, or you may be using your camera on the mountains behind you, or you notice something, you know, in your hikes that somehow has some connection to something that you saw in Museum of Technology, Jurassic Technology, however you want to play it. I'm sort of giving you two. So this goes back to the creativity game of like, there's two things from different origins, and we're now putting it into this context of our creativity conference. And Mary Trunk is going to try to, you know, bend it and break it and blend it for us.
You know, it's interesting. Okay, first thing that comes to mind, I remember taking a hike with my daughter when she was in town, and we went, we always used to do the same hike. And I said to her one day, let's go the other way around. Let's go backward. And we both saw things, we felt like we were in a new place. Where were we? And then so I feel like that sort of connects me to the Jurassic Technology Museum, because you don't know what to expect in that place. And then as we came back around we were coming backward, we noticed that there was a tennis court in a place we just never noticed before. I mean, and then these giant black dogs jumped out at us, and it just seemed so unreal and so different, a different experience. All you have to do is turn around.
Yeah.
Turn around and go the other way. Of course, it was more difficult. So my kid was like, we're not doing that again.
Okay, you passed. So I think
to that museum though, I haven't been there in a really long time, so I want to get back there.
Yeah, and then next time I see you, I'll have a story about the first time I've been there.
Oh, great.
I'm so thrilled to be able to introduce the Renaissance woman artist, architect, Sheila Klein to you. And I know of Sheila a long time ago when she and the late Woodbury University Dean Norman Millar, as well as Reese Nemi, right?
Yep.
Which is Sheila's husband, who's also an artist. We're in a practice A to Z, which is like the first sort of interdisciplinary practice I've ever seen. And they were doing wonderful things. And since then, Sheila has done so much. Her work has been exhibited all over the world, Tokyo, Florence, everywhere in the country. And of course, we're extremely happy last year that one of the most well-known and beloved piece of urban art that Sheila had created for a city has returned. And I'm hoping that she will talk about it, which is Vermonica. And it's always good for me to have a chance to always say that Vermonica came 15 years before Chris Burden's Urban Lights in LACMA. So with that, and Sheila, we look forward to you sharing with us. And I wanted to also say that how delightful it is to have you both in the airport, in the subway, on the street in Los Angeles.
Thank you. I'm happy to
And
be
I
there.
wanted to just say, like Carolina Miranda was right when she actually called Veronica a gesture of healing for the 1992 civil unrest. And I think that I will always think about that piece that way and of you as the healer. So
thank you.
So go ahead.
All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me. And we're going to do a little traveling together. And Corinne and I are going to do this together. So next slide, please. I live in the Pacific Northwest on a 32-acre farm north of Seattle, between Seattle and Vancouver. Next. I also live in Buenos Aires, in the center of the city, as you can see, very different from where I live in the Pacific Northwest. I love the contrast between these two places and the polarity between them. And I'm going to show you some of my inspiration and some of the ways that I work. So next slide, please. When I first came to Buenos Aires, I tend to be a student of cities, and I love to just walk all day and look at everything. I love to go to the grocery store and look at how products are packaged and the names of them and the labels and all that sort of thing. And I discovered this cloth that is made for cleaning. And I was shocked at how many different kinds of cloth existed. And I started to buy small pieces. I mean, they call it trapos. I don't know how many Spanish speakers we have on today, but I started to collect all the different cloth that I could find that are for cleaning things. And it's amazing. The Argentines have a whole industry that is small, but ubiquitous, of specialty weaving things to clean. This to me is extremely unusual. Next slide. When I saw the cloth to begin with, the first thing I thought of was a Chanel jacket. That's just the way my brain works. And I thought, I'm going to make myself a Chanel jacket out of this cloth. And so I did. And I started to wear it around and people liked it. And a lot of my work takes many, many years to birth. And I really was excited to do something that was really immediate. And I've always I've always done a lot of public work, but I've also done my studio work and private projects and personal projects. And so there's always been a big mix of things. And I've made clothes pretty much my whole life. Next slide. In 2008, when we had the crash, I had over $1 million worth of work that I lost, because most of the projects were infrastructure projects that were basically stopped. And it was at that time that I began to put a little more effort towards more than just making myself one Chanel jacket. And I started New Trade Route, which is my line of clothing. And it's a very small and it's very much of an artist project. I would not call it a brand. But you can see on the left the graphic of where I live to Buenos Aires. And so it's my new trade route. Some people have the spice route. I have this. And you can see also the factory where the cloth is made. And I'm really interested in the structure of this cloth because it's more related to knit and crochet than it is to weaving. There isn't a warp and a weft. All of the threads are fed into the loom. You can see there's a rack behind the gentleman that's in front of the loom, and that's all spools on the rack. So all the threads are entering the loom one at a time, and not like a solid warp that you then have a weft that's moving through it. Next, please. We make the pieces in my studio. And to begin with, I was only making them in the United States. And I did not want to sell them in an orthodox way. Because again, I wasn't thinking of it as a brand. I was thinking of it more as an artist project. And so I made a fantasy, I guess, of myself as a peddler, a roving peddler, selling my pieces sort of out on the street. Next slide. This is well, on the left, I'm standing in front of where I sell, which I'm going to talk a lot more about soon. And you can sort of see that the pieces go a lot of different directions in terms of how you can wear them. Part of the idea of the clothing is that one size fits all, or fits most, zero waste, and expressing and using all of the characteristics of the cloth in the garment. The other thing about it is that I'm referencing a lot of classic fashion things like Chanel jackets. So there's chemise, there's gowns, there's dusters, there's all kinds of things. Many of the pieces are unisex, and the idea is to wear it all the time. One of the expressions I had early on in my career was, I want to dress the world, and this is just another piece of dressing the world. Next, please. I have decided to sometimes put myself in extremely vulnerable situations. Once I went to the museum Malba, which is in Buenos Aires, to set up illegally as a vendor during a very big opening, and I lasted about 20 minutes before I was asked to leave. But there were many interesting conversations, and luckily I got a bunch of pictures. Another time I went to an art gallery, and you can see that I was being ignored on the right-hand side by everybody. Who was like, who is this person sitting who really does not look like a normal vendedora ambulante, meaning portable vendor, but instead looks kind of like somebody who might live in this neighborhood, but she's sitting on the floor with clothing made out of the cloth that we normally clean the counter with. There was a lot of question. I want to tell you, I'm not going to focus on this too much, but what ended up happening that night, I had a couple girlfriends with me. I usually try to take cover, and they were taking pictures because I always want documentation. And suddenly the gallery dealer came out, and I was a little worried that he might kick me out. But instead he came over and he said, oh, hi, how are you? Remember we were dancing in the club the other night? And it turned out that we had friends in common, and he brought me out a drink and started hugging me. And the minute he did that, all of the people who were standing, and at that point there were many more people standing, turned around, and they all started asking me a lot of questions, trying everything on, all in Spanish. So it was really, really interesting. Next, please. I live 2 miles outside of a little village called Edison that's 150 people. The first time I went into Edison with my baskets, I went with a girlfriend and I said, will you go with me and take some pictures and let's see what happens. So I packed up my you can see the little village here. I packed up my baskets. I went to a place where I knew there was this tree, and I hung my things in the tree, and I leaned the mirror up against the tree. And all of my work is about making a place, whether it's making clothing or anything else. And suddenly people started to come over and speak with me and try things on. And before I knew it, I had sold 4 pieces, and I thought, hey, this could be a thing. So I was very encouraged. Next, please. I continued to go into the little village at my own whim when I can, when the weather is good, when it's not too, and where I live, the weather is not always so good. Setting up at the corner after the initial time of a friend of mine's shop, and he gave me permission to do that. And I would create a little space outside of his shop, which is called Shop Curator. And I would start to peddle my wares and speak with people. And the discussions are always really interesting because, you know, cloth is very undervalued in our society. And everybody thinks about things made out of cloth being very cheap, and because of fast fashion. And I'm sort of the other side of that, because I'm taking something which is actually thought of as being humble, in reality is quite luxurious. And I'm adding almost couture type sewing to create these garments. So I'm really playing with a lot of different ideas. Additionally, a lot of people know who I am. So they're like, Sheila Klein is selling dresses on the street in Edison. What's up with that? So I really love that part of it as well. Next, please. I think it's interesting as an artist to put yourself in a vulnerable position. Mary talked about this also. And every time I go to Edison, I never know what's going to happen. It's kind of kismet, like who's going to show up? Is anybody going to speak with me? Generally speaking, people come from the village and talk with me. There's a lot of young artists. And part of my reason for doing this, the way I'm doing it, is also to continue to be a part of the village, which has become very trendy. So I like to feel still a part of it. I just lost the screen here and I don't know why, but oh, good, thanks. Next slide, please. This is a gallery in Edison that actually I show at, and you can see, actually, Corinne, is it possible to go back once for 1 sec? I want to point out that as time went on, I've added a lot to my little setup. So I brought an awning that I from Buenos Aires, and I made a framework for it and I put it up. And then a friend of mine gave me that mantle, and my husband redid the bench. And I have some little screw eyes that I hang up my clothesline. So over the years, I've sort of added things to this spot. Next, please. When I had a show in the gallery, I added awnings to the gallery too, to sort of claim my space. I like showing you this because it gives you a sense of what this little village is like. It's really only one corner of retail, and then the rest is residential. Next, please. You can read about Edison. We're very proud of it. We've been living here 27 years. In the little village, there are many beautiful places to eat, an incredible bakery, number of cheesemakers, a lot of interesting shops, galleries, just in this one little area. And that's actually Reese and I, my husband and I, walking across the street, and in this little article, which we thought was pretty funny, about a road trip. Next, please. So the pandemic came, and we have a 22-acre field that we leased to a real farmer, and he grew potatoes last year. And he did something, I've been living at this farm for 27 years, and he did something that never has been done before, which is he made a road or a track all the way around the field that was hard packed that I could walk on. And the reason he did that is because he had some kind of new harvesting equipment, and therefore needed to have these sort of little roads that went all around the field. And I, in the midst of my COVID anxiety, started walking around the field. You know, I didn't have to go out anywhere. I just started walking around the field, And I was like, oh, this is a runway. I can do a clothing show here. I'm going to figure out how I can make a show for New Trade Route here, which I'll talk about a little more. But this was sort of the setup, and you get a feeling for our place a little bit here. Next. I enlisted 12 friends of mine who were wearing all the clothes. Many of them own the clothes, and everybody lived nearby. I was really worried about COVID, so we went to the part of the farm where we wouldn't be seen, so that we didn't have a lot of people stopping. We had no spectators, only the people who were in the piece were there. And so there was a total of 20 people, 12 models. I had 3 photographers, a DJ, some fluffers, and my 2 studio assistants. And it was really quite amazing. And everybody was very separate. This was before, this was last summer. So we were still kind of in the depths of it all. This was sort of the only thing anybody did, kind of thing. Next, please. Are we missing the videos? Because I think we are. I think they didn't happen.
I took them out, but we can share them separately.
Okay, these are some of the stills from what I called cotton and potatoes, because the clothing is all cotton and the field is potatoes. Maybe let's see what the next slide is, and maybe we'll share it right now. Okay, let's go back. Sorry, everyone, this is going to be a little bit out of order, but let's start with the first video, Corinne, which is me going into Edison, and it gives you an idea of what that's like. In this particular case, it's the first video that was there, Corinne. It's got I'm leaving my farm. I'm driving the 2 miles into Edison. My assistant is in the car with me. She's filming. And again, I have no idea. You get an idea of where I live here. I have no idea what I'm going to expect, who will be there. And for some reason, and this is what it looks like when I arrive. And for some reason, on this particular day, I was taking everything out of my car, and it just got really busy really fast. And lots of people started coming to talk to me. And before I knew it, there was a crowd of people before I was even set up. And it was quite neat. And then the next video is one that I made about wear it all the time. So one of the key pieces is called All Day Gown. And the idea is you could wear it to sleep in, wake up, brush your teeth, put on your underwear and your accessories, go to work, go out, work in the yard, come home, get back in bed in the same dress. This is an old apartment that is on the farm. And that's my office. Never looks that clean, but that's it. And now she's going back to bed, taking off her jewelry. Good night. Okay, the last video for this is the cotton and potatoes. It's not the whole show, but it will give you a good sense of what the show was like and the range of clothing.
Just give me 1 second. I'll get it up, don't worry.
No, I'm not worried. I appreciate it very much, Corinne.
No problem. All right, here we go.
There's the DJ. We had to carry everything out.
Soy princesa pero piola. No quiero nada, me bola. Conmigo puedes relajar. Soy buena portándome mal. Estoy jodida y radiante. Con ganas de más. No me importa qué hiciste antes. O si mañana no estás.
sense of the whole farm. One of the things I want to say about this too was the organization was really interesting because I couldn't get together with anybody. So I would have to, in order to figure out the quote looks, I had everybody sending me pictures and they would lay out the outfit and I would talk to them about shoes. And of course, a lot of people wanted to use different shoes. And I was like, no, you're going to be walking a lot in the field. We need to have shoes that you can really walk in. We had to figure out, we couldn't change very easily because we're all out there together and we didn't want to be in close proximity. So there were a lot of logistics and I absolutely loved that part of it. And everybody felt really safe. And in many cases, there were families, like there was 3 sisters and a mother. So I kind of tried to keep it so that there were less individuals and more kind of couples or families, because also parking, all that stuff. And then this entire thing happened within 2.5 hours because, everybody arrived about 5:30 and kind of gathered. And by 8:15, 8:30, everybody was gone. And so it was really a very amazing night. And it was great that all the potatoes were blooming. And also the next week they harvested the potatoes. So it was really lucky that my timing was what it was. Okay, so this is what I would call my most intimate project, where I dress you up, you physically. So now we'll talk about some of the other things. Next, please. Vermonica was conceived of in the early 90s. I'm going to make it pretty brief because this could be a 50-minute talk all on its own. I had this idea to make an urban candelabra. Initially, I thought about doing it in the Baldwin Hills because my studio was in Inglewood and I would drive over the hills and I could I thought of it as much more a bigger base, very Italianate kind of looking thing. And then the civil uprising happened of 92, and I decided it should be in a place that was burned out because it would be a symbol of hope and it would be a more beautiful thing than a burned out site. So I found this site that is very near the Bureau of Street Lighting. I was on the board of overseers at Barnsdall Park, and I was driving there, and it was this whole corner. This is the corner of Santa Monica and Vermont. That's where the name comes from. And I thought, I'm going to call that guy and see if he'll let me do my piece there. I was very naive about what it takes to do this. I thought I could just get a bunch of street lights and bolt them down on old foundations. Of course, that was no. But anyway, so I spent, I did this entire project on $9,000, including 2 years of my work and my husband's work and Norman and other friends. And the rest of it was, this was when I was pretty young and I was trying to, do the work I wanted to do. And sometimes you just have to show people what that is. Next, please. I had to go to the Bureau of Street Lighting and ask for their permission. And at that time, there were 75 active people working at street lighting. And I made my presentation and I told them, why I wanted to do it and what it was. And 55 of the people who worked there volunteered because all the work had to happen after hours. And you won't believe this, many of you who know how the world is now. But the city of LA gave me and my crew and the Bureau of Street Lighting a no-fault liability insurance, saying that none of us, the Board of Supervisors approved this, that none of us would sue the other guy if somebody got hurt or something happened. I mean, I can't imagine any of this happening now. I actually worked in their yard for close to 4 months, preparing all the poles. Many of these poles had not been installed in many, many years. And each foundation is unique for each pole. Next, please. By the way, I launched a new website for only Vermonica because there's so many people who've been involved. So if you really want the full story, you can go to vermonica.com. And the birthday of the piece is May 5th. And next May 5th, 2022, we're planning to have a big street party and you're all invited. We're also planning to have a public conversation and maybe some of you will take part in that. This was right before the opening when the Bureau of Street Lighting came to the site with all their trucks, and all the guys and friends of mine who were well-known chefs in LA and still are actually provided food, and a lot of neighborhood places provided food, and Cultural Affairs sent a mariachi band because it was Cinco de Mayo, and it was a giant party with the whole city, high, low, the street lighting people, the art world, the neighborhood. It was really, really a special night. And Huell Hauser was there. I don't know how many of you remember who he is, but he did a show on this, and you can find it on YouTube. And it's called Visiting with Huell Vermonica. Next, please. There it is at night. And like I said, Vermonica.com has all the press, the whole story. And I just launched it on May 5th this year. And so it's still in process, but there's quite a bit there. Next, please. These are just some shots of it in its original location in that parking lot at Santa Monica and Vermont. And, part of it for me also was making art in a place that is normally not meant for art. So, using this parking strip and saying, I'm going to put a sculpture there. And this linear sculpture made sense there. Next, please. Well, on November 17th, 3 years ago, I got a message from somebody I didn't know saying to me, what happened to Vermonica? And I'm like, what do you mean what happened to Vermonica? And they said, well, we really love your piece and we always take people that are coming to LA to see it. And we went there and it's not there. I'm like, wait a minute, this thing is 30 feet tall and 120 feet long. It doesn't just get up and walk away. So the next morning, and I couldn't even believe it, really. And the next morning I woke up and I went on Facebook and I said, okay, LA, what's up? Where's Vermonica? What happened? And within a few hours, I knew what happened. And it had been dismantled by the Bureau of Street Lighting. It's a long story. I'm not going to go all into it here. A lot of it's on the website. And, it was one of those things where a disconnect between art and the rest of the world, because they didn't really realize that I had intellectual property rights to this piece. And they had intended to take it down and give it to a guy who was retiring, and it dovetailed with the shopping center wanting to redevelop. And they used that as an excuse. Anyway, we won't get all into that because that's a whole nother conversation. But anyway, they took it down and they reinstalled it. Let's see the next slide. Oh, this is my statement the day that it happened. Well, it was like 3 days later. And what was really amazing is how many people reached out to me and how much I realized this piece meant to so many different types of people. And I had a lot of people who wanted to help me figure out how to remedy the situation. This is an interesting thing to read if you get a chance. It's on Esoturic's website, and it's also on the Vermonica website. Next, please. This is the travesty that they installed in front of street lighting. Everything about it was wrong. Number one, it was never meant to be in front of a building, so it was really busy. Number two, all the poles were way too close. It was bifurcated because of the pathway. The orientation of the poles was all cattywampus. There was not the kind of elegance of it all sort of being on the same plane. Every single thing was wrong about it. I was so distraught about it. It was worse than if they had just taken everything down and just put it away in a yard. So let's see what the next picture is. Well, here's what happened. Esotoric, who never gave up from day one, I'm just going to say very briefly, they uncovered a cache of emails between the city and between the city people, each other, the downtown office and the field office, which were very damning to their intention. And at that point, I had enough physical evidence to force the city to do the right thing, and I did. And now you have Vermonica back in actually in some ways a better location. And now it's protected and it will be there hopefully forever. And it's closer to the Bureau, so it kind of amplifies their position. We fell back in love. They understood what they did wrong. Maybe not every single person there, but many of the people. And they're very proud of how it's all ended up. So let's take a look at some of these next pictures. This was taking it all down and putting it all back up. And I hope you'll go see it. Maybe some of you have driven by it. And I'm really extremely pleased with how it's turned out in the end. And I guess you could say the silver lining is that many young people don't know about the origin of this piece. And I think now it has brought it into the foreground again. And, you know, there's probably been, I don't know, 20 articles in the last 3 years in all kinds of publications. So, and I'm sure there'll be much more once our COVIDity is a little less present. Next slide, please. I couldn't have a formalized opening for the piece. Can you go back one, please? Because it was your biggest lockdown in LA. So I drove into LA. I have never seen Santa Monica Boulevard so empty in my life. We were jaywalking across the street all day long. There was not a car, if you can imagine. And street lighting, you know, we were not supposed to do anything, but they really wanted to do something. I was in town. And so they took a bucket truck to the alley across from the piece. They put a bunch of photographers in it. And the funniest thing that they did, and I don't have a slide of it here, is they made this dummy lever for turning on the lights. So it was like 1, 2, 3, and you know, it was daylight, so nobody saw the difference anyway. They had a guy behind there going, "Tell us when, and we'll turn on the lights," because it was going to be the first night it was lit. But anyway, these are all the people who worked on it with me on this round, and it was a beautiful day in spite of the fact that we couldn't invite anybody. One thing I want to give a shout out to is Lauren Amador was the architect on the project with me, and a really cool thing about that is that Lauren was Norman Millar's student and also worked for Norman, and so the spirit of Norman continues to be woven into my life. And they were an incredible asset because, of course, you know, you don't know what you're going to discover when you decide to put something on a street that's old. This is Route 66. There's all kinds of utilities and vaults. And, you know, we still wanted to have this kind of rhythm and this elegance. And we accomplished that. And it was thrilling. So I hope you'll drive by and hang out and see it. Next, please. These are some beautiful photos that were done by an artist named Ian Byers, who documented the piece and asked me if he could come and document when we were reinstalling. And he's done the most beautiful job, and many of his photographs of the deinstallation and reinstallation are on the Vermonica.com site. And he volunteered, and he lived nearby, so he was able to be there a lot. Next, please. Next. So now we're going to travel a little more. This is Pittsburgh, which is where I'm from originally. I left home at the young age of 15, thinking I would never go back there. Until in the 2000s, I got a call from somebody saying to me, "We'd like you to come out and interview to do a bridge in Pittsburgh." And I was like, I don't think so. And they were like, I was actually in Buenos Aires, and they said, "Why not?" And I said, because they were not very well funded for the artist portion of it. And I thought to myself, they need to have an artist that's living on the East Coast, because I'll eat up my entire fee just traveling back and forth. They said, "Just come out and interview." So I said, okay. And I really had not been in Pittsburgh for a long time. And the interesting thing about this bridge is it's between the two neighborhoods I grew up in. One, the sort of shtetl of the Jewish community, I'll call it, and the other, the more bohemian intellectual community of Shadyside. So that's why the piece is called Shady Liberty. And I thought it was really interesting that, here I am making a bridge between the two worlds I grew up in. Anyway, they interviewed me and they convinced me to take the project. And they said, if you come up with a beautiful idea, we will get it funded and we will make sure that you're funded, that your fee is funded enough too. And sure enough, that happened. And the Heinz Foundation and the Pittsburgh Foundation jumped in. And once I had the design for it. So there was no architect. It was just me and the engineer. And the engineer had never worked with an artist before. And Pennsylvania had never done a bridge with an artist before. And this pedestrian bridge is over a right-of-way, a railroad right-of-way. So there's all this kind of PennDOT rule about right-of-ways and things like that. So there are all these limitations from day one. One thing I want to point out here is when the only thing I was given on this project was the basic footprint of the bridge and the basic engineering. And when I looked at it, I thought, it is so clunky. It's like this big chunky thing in the middle of a place that is smaller. And I really didn't like it. So I thought, how am I going to carve this space? And they gave me all these things I had to have. Like I had to have cyclone fencing for suicide fencing, and I had to have lighting. I had to have all these, I mean, not as much as I have now, but I mean, in the final thing, but I had to have a certain amount of things. And I thought, okay, I'm going to put a planting bed outboard of the cyclone fence, because you'll see it from the neighborhoods and it'll be this soft edge and it'll really kind of carve the space and make it a more shapely kind of passageway rather than this kind of chunky flat thing. And at first everybody was like, but wait a minute, then people aren't going to be able to walk in those spaces. And I was like, that's right. It's not about how much space there is to walk. It's about the quality of the space that you're walking in. And it took a while for me to convince them, but in the end, they were convinced. And believe me, I changed a lot of people's minds about how things could get done if only we would collaborate with each other in the different disciplines. So I got my planting. You can see it here. It was just newly planted. Now it's really lush. And I'll explain more about the rest of it because this is before the deck was painted and the asphalt was on it. So this is looking from Shadyside to East Liberty. Next slide, please. So I was inspired by the street painting place when they took me around to see a lot of things in Pittsburgh. And I decided I was going to make the deck of the bridge like an abstract painting, sort of a la, I don't know, Clifford Still, maybe not, but out of the street striping equipment. And that is what you see here on this slide. And then I also collaborated with the Pittsburgh Glass Center to make, I think it was 8,000 4-inch glass sequins, which reflect the light and make this sort of glittery edge that you see from, both sides and from the neighborhoods. Next slide, please. This gives you an idea of sort of the structural part of it, the planting bed, this gigantic beam that had to be there. And I had the cyclone fencing was painted blue, kind of like the sky, so it did disappear a little bit. The lighting was custom, and obviously the posts that held the cyclone fencing were all custom as well. Next, please. That was my inspiration for the deck. I actually took that picture in the street striping yard. That's where they would test their equipment. Next, please. That was us making a test of the equipment so I could see what the limitations were with it. And on the left side was my initial sample with the sequins, and they were all put on the cyclone fencing with stainless steel zip ties. And that was another thing, they were like, well, what if one of these falls into the right of way? And I said, no, they will never fall into the runaway, because if they fall at all, they'll be in the planting bed, because the planting bed was outboard of where the sequins are. Next, please. That's the deck. Next. This is a side view, and you can see that the lighting is still on, and you can see all the sequins catching the light. And then on the side of the large beam that is the main structural element of the bridge, I found some vintage railing that had been on the site prior, and I infilled the beam with that just to give it a little more interest from the side. Next. And here it is with the lighting not on, and you can see how much the sequins catch ambient light and create this kind of glittery edge from all around. Next, please. And there it is at dusk. Next. So we're going to go back to more intimate things, since I was thinking about from intimate to monumental. When I grew up in Pittsburgh, I spent every weekend at the Carnegie Museum. I was so lucky to do that. It really helped me grow up because I started making art from the beginning. And I guess I should say that I don't have any college degree. I never went to college. I just started doing things. I could say that Norman Millar was my education in architecture, but I started working with architects very early in my career. This is the Hall of Architecture from the Carnegie Museum, and it's a series of fragments of important architectural elements. And it was always very intriguing and inspiring to me as a child, and it continues to be a big influence on my life. Next, please. There was a moment at which I realized the relationship between architecture, pattern, crochet, and the hand. And I realized that architecture is a series of posts and openings. Crochet is a series of posts and openings. That all of these types of patterns, this is a plan for City of 3 million inhabitants from 1922, are based on these ancient patterns, that were woven into textiles. So I was kind of taking it back that direction. Next, please. I had the chance to travel to India 3 times and teach at the National Institute of Design, and I had 2 major exhibitions there. And the first time I went, I realized that my idea was reinforced by much of the architecture that I saw there. This is looking up into a Jain temple, and I was like, oh, that's crochet. And so I crocheted it. Next. I went to many temples, and I went to many places that had jali, which are the screens that are in many buildings that are carved. And I was like, oh, that's crochet. And so I crocheted it. Next. In this series, there's probably about 30 pieces, and I always think the Carnegie Museum should acquire some. I have sold some of them, but I have a lot of the big ones. And I actually had the chance to do a really interesting project with Muslim women about the architecture that surrounds them. And we crocheted some of the motifs together from the buildings that they inhabit every day. And that was an amazing project. Next, please. This is a picture I took at the Red Fort, which I always thought, wow, look at this old screen. It's just like cyclone fencing. I love finding those connections. Next, please. So I crocheted it. Actually, this show is, these images are from one of the shows I did in India. Next. And here I am. It's still very important to me that I make a lot of my own work. I don't make all of it, obviously. I work with a lot of other people, and but I still maintain a very strong studio practice, and it's really important to me that my energy and my DNA is kind of in these works. My hair gets woven into it, things like that. Next. Currently, I'm working on a project for the an expansion to the Seattle Convention Center. And let's see what happens with that. Thank you so much for inviting me. And that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you so much, Sheila. That was a broad range of things. I wanted to share again just the QR code for those who are interested in, and we'll do this. Well, I'll show you with all the guts and everything. So here's the QR codes. So I don't know how our time is doing, but again, we invite people to post their questions on chat, but I want to make an observation, Sheila, that, you're really an enigma to me because, we've always talked about you being the chief retranslator of everyday objects. And I think people have talked about you even on your website as a manipulator of familiar and archetypal images. Mary's going to post a question, which I'll pick up. I want to say that, you struck me as like a person of confidence to say that what you want to make can be made and should be made. And that in what is strange about it is that you think that ego is there, but in fact, you're the most generous person because like the generosity that you do in your work, especially in the public work, to be inclusive, and you find ways to welcome in, the whole community, and in doing so, you help build a strong community. So this kind of contradiction of the self and sort of giving of the self is just kind of miraculous, in terms of an artist's life. And the other thing, which, I wanted to celebrate about you is that we always like working with resistance. Like without resistance, we can't come up with ideas because if everything is easy. So, but you thrive on resistance. Like the more difficult stuff it is, the more you want to swim in it, and the more you come out of it, victorious. So I wanted to just celebrate that too. So Mary has a question, but Mary, do you want to go ahead and ask your
Hi,
question?
Sheila. Wow. I just loved seeing all of that. It was amazing.
Thank you.
I have a question, but I also wanted to just let you know that I have banned my students from using urban light as a location to film in because they all do it and I'm sick of it. So now I'm going to send them all over to
the original.
But I really was intrigued by the clothing line and the whole idea of that you went out and sort of set up a set and an installation and a performance. And I wonder if you could talk, if that felt like that to you, if that's.
Oh yeah, it's a performance. I have to get really geared up for it.
Yeah, and
I can't do it if I'm feeling wimpy because I could meet with some really bad reactions. Sometimes people can be really rude to me,
yeah,
and say kind of mean things.
Well,
And
I was thinking because it's sort of like, I know this is weird. I owned a flower shop for 5 years, and I was like Academy Award winner for pretending I was Martha Stewart, but I hated dealing with customers. And I thought about you, and I thought being on the street like that, it's
talk about no filters.
Yeah. So, and then I do love the, and the fact of selling and psychology of that. And I love the clothes, and I would love to use them as costumes for my dancers and do a dance in the fields, the potato fields.
Let's do it. That would be awesome. I actually have a site near Joshua Tree that I want to do, that I own, that I want to do a piece at. So maybe we can talk about that.
Let's do. I love Joshua Tree, but I just think it was really an interesting idea to go out there and have, it felt like an installation and performance art and exposing yourself.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And also dealing with economy, like what is something worth? What is the value of what is the value of things?
Yeah.
And talk about that. Have people say, wow, that's expensive. And then say, well, actually, it's really not. And here's why.
Did you, and what was your, how did you figure out what things cost? Did you?
How did I figure out what things cost? Well, I mean, there's a series of steps, you know, like I bring the material in my suitcase. So it's not available in the United States, and it's a really limited amount of material that I can bring. And so that's one thing. And then then everything is made one off. You saw Pearl, my assistant, who's doing all the production sewing.
Okay.
And you know, the pieces have evolved over a number of years, because it was like I did the Chanel jacket at the very beginning, but then it took a long time for everything else to sort of evolve to the point where it is now. And it's really only been in the last 4 or 5 years that it's where it is. And last year, of course, I was not on the street selling.
Yeah.
In fact, I've only gone once, and it was about 2 weeks ago, because the weather here is still kind of iffy. And I really like the performative aspect of it. And I've developed a lot of ways that I talk to people in certain areas that have, because, you know, there's certain rote things that happen on a certain level. One of the things that's really surprising to me is there are some people who just make a beeline for me. They're just like, what is that? I want to talk to her. I want to check that out. And then other people are kind of like horrified by the whole concept of somebody sitting there. And then there are other people who are kind of insulted that the things are priced like an artist product. You know, they're not from Walmart, they're not from Kmart. They are, I'm standing in front of you, and my entire life has been put into this thing. And I'm telling you that you will love wearing this. It's very durable. It's very, it feels like a hug when you're wearing it. The fabric is amazing to wear. It's remarkable. And I love talking about all that stuff. And I'm totally willing to engage in those conversations. And I think, you know, I had somebody recently say to me, wow, I really wasn't expecting that price. And I was like, well, and there's somebody I know, and they know my work. And I said, well, now, if this was a drawing that I made, would you think it was very expensive? And they said, no. And I said, well, this is a drawing you can wear, and it's way more useful, and it's way more fun. And so there you have it.
Wow.
That's wonderful. So I wanted to just wrap this up because of the time. We could go on all night, and we should probably have another opportunity to get together. So to wrap it up, I like to just do one more game. And this is going to be, Sheila doesn't have to do it, everyone else have to do it, which is based on what you have seen in Sheila's presentation. Can you think of the first thing that comes to your mind of an architectural element? Floor, wall, ceiling, window, door, whatever, light fixture, just put it on chat. And that's an experiment. We'll save it for Sheila to see what came out of it. And this goes back to that kind of round room of your brain. See what cards Sheila actually deposited in your brain tonight. So go ahead and do that.
So I'm going to do kind of the closing here. So wanted to thank everybody for attending. Thank our moderator, Annie Chu, and presenters, Mary Trunk of Ma and Pa Films, and artist Sheila Klein. And also a thank you for our participating sponsors, Armstrong Ceilings, Integrated Marketing Solutions, and MOSA, and our virtual exhibitors, PLP SoCal and Solo Tube International, and then also our annual sponsors.